Hi, friends. It's Pastor Carly. I hope you're having a good week so far. We as a church have been talking about parenting. We focused on it just this last Sunday in church. And as we've been thinking about parenting, it's beautiful how it's been intersecting my own life and journey in my reading. Just this last week, I was reading in the book of 1 Samuel, and I was struck by the story of Hannah and what an incredible mom she was. So if you know the story of Hannah, she struggled with fertility for years. And if you know our story, we struggled with secondary infertility for years. And so there's a piece of me that really can understand and resonate with Hannah. See, Hannah wasn't able to have children for a really long time. And we read in 1 Samuel chapter 1 that she was so distressed and devastated. It says that she would weep and didn't eat. I mean, she was desperate to have a child and it just wasn't happening. It says she was deeply distressed and she prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And so she said, she had this prayer though, and she said, God, if you will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. So she was committing even before he was born, before her son was going to be born. And yes, she does end up having a child. But before she had that hope burst forth, she was still committed and saying, God, if you do this, I will give him right back to you. And she would go to the temple and she would pray, and people would actually make fun of her and think she was out of her mind or drunk. But it says that she just kept pouring out her soul before the Lord. And she would it says she would speak out of her great anxiety, like in the middle of her distress, in the middle of her anxiety, she just kept seeking the Lord. And then it says that after this one day she went and she prayed and she talked to the priest, and the priest said, go in peace, and the God of Israel, may he grant your petition that you have made to him. And she said, let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went on her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. And then verse 19, I love this. It says, they rose early in the morning, she and her husband, and worshiped before the Lord. And I think that's so powerful. I wrote it down in my Bible. I underlined it. I think it's so powerful because, you know what? Her circumstances hadn't changed yet. She didn't know for sure if she was going to become pregnant. She didn't know. I mean, yes, the priest had given her this blessing and she felt a change in her spirit, but there was nothing that had changed in her physically. Her circumstances hadn't changed, but she continued, just like she had every other day, she continued to worship, even though there was not a physical change yet, even though her prayer hadn't been answered yet. And this just shows me so much about who Hannah was, that she was someone who was habitually praying and worshiping, even in the midst of her anguish, even in the midst of her grief, even in the midst of her disappointment and distress. She just continued to worship. And yes, God did answer her prayer, and she gave birth to a boy named Samuel. But I just think about the character of Hannah, that as she raised up Samuel and she gave him back to God, as she said, she raised that boy in a home where he saw his mom worship no matter the circumstances. On the days that she was tired, she was worshiping because that's just who she was. On the days that she was exhausted or stressed or frustrated, she just continued to worship. And Samuel watched his mom. Samuel watched her. He probably knew from an early age the story of his coming to be and how his mother had prayed. And it says in verse 27, for this child I prayed. She had prayed and prayed, and she probably told Samuel, I prayed and prayed for you. I didn't give up. I prayed on the hardest of days. I prayed even when I didn't have the words. I worshiped even when my circumstances weren't what I was hoping for. And as I think about that for me in my life and for me as a parent, I want to be like Hannah, where I want my girls to see me worship so habitually, so consistently, no matter my circumstances, that they see this habit of praise in my life. I want them to see that I trust in God even when my circumstances aren't exactly what I'm hoping for. And yes, they may change, but my hope is not tied to my circumstances. My hope is tied to the goodness and character and faithfulness of God. And Hannah, God answered her prayer. But even if he hadn't, I think that Hannah would have still rose early in the morning every day and praised, because that's who she was, and she knew who her God was to her. And so that's my challenge for all of us, especially for those of us that are parents, but even if we're not, there are people watching us, whether littles in our house, whether for some of you grandkids, or the people in your community or in your office. People are watching to see where our hope is tied, to see where we find our hope for tomorrow. People are watching to see if we will rise and worship and praise, even in the toughest of circumstances. And I think that when we do, our families, our communities, our coworkers, our friends will be changed, but so will we. So let's follow in the footsteps of Hannah and make it a habit to just praise God, to worship him, no matter our circumstances. I will be back again on Thursday to talk a little bit more about Hannah's story and Samuel's story as well. So I look forward to connecting with you on Thursday. Blessings, my friends.